He woke up before the alarm, as he often did. The room was still dark, and the small apartment was quiet, except for the soft sound of breathing from the other room. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, already thinking about the long day ahead. His back ached from yesterday's work, but rest was not something he could afford. He quietly got out of bed and walked to his daughter's room. She was curled up under a thin blanket, hugging an old stuffed bear. He stood there for a few seconds, watching her sleep. Moments like this gave him strength. She was the reason he kept going, even when everything felt heavy after a quick shower with cold water because the heater had stopped working. Weeks ago, he dressed in worn jeans and a faded jacket. He made a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, then gently woke his daughter. She rubbed her eyes and smiled when she saw him. They ate together at the small table. He packed her lunch carefully, making sure she had enough. Before leaving, he knelt down and reminded her to listen to her teacher and be careful. She hugged him tightly before heading to school. Once she was gone, the weight returned. Bills were stacked on the counter. Rent was due soon. His phone showed missed calls from numbers he didn't want to answer. Still, he picked up his keys and left. Being late was not an option. His first job was at a warehouse on the edge of town. Long hours, heavy lifting, low pay. The work was tiring, but he didn't complain. Complaining didn't pay bills. During breaks, he drank water and stared at the floor, saving his energy. His coworkers talked about vacations and plans. He stayed quiet. His plans were simple: survive another month. By late afternoon, his body felt weak, but his day wasn't over. He clocked out and drove straight to his second job, delivering food in the evening. His car was old, with a cracked windshield and strange noises, but it still ran. He took care of it the best he could. That evening, the sky was dark and heavy with clouds. Rain started falling hard, making the roads shiny and slippery. He drove slowly, focusing on the road. He wanted to finish quickly and get home to his daughter. After his last delivery, he took a shortcut near a bridge that crossed a deep river. He had driven this road many times. It was usually quiet. But that night, something felt different. As he approached the bridge, he noticed headlights ahead, moving strangely. A sleek, expensive car was speeding too fast for the wet road. He watched as the driver tried to brake. The car swerved, hit the railing, and in a terrifying moment, broke through it. The sound was loud and sharp. The car disappeared over the edge. For a second, everything froze. His heart began to race. He pulled over without thinking and jumped out of his car. Rain soaked his clothes instantly. He ran to the edge of the bridge and looked down. The car had crashed into the river below. Water splashed high as it began to sink. The current was strong, pulling it deeper. People would say later that they would have called for help first. Maybe some would have waited, but he didn't. He didn't think about danger or consequences. All he could think was that someone was in that car. He took off his jacket and shoes and climbed over the railing. The cold water hit him like a shock as he jumped in. His breath caught in his chest, but he forced himself to swim. He was not a strong swimmer. He had learned a little as a kid, but never trained. Still, he pushed forward, fighting the current and the cold. The rain made it harder to see. The car was sinking fast. Water was already halfway over the windows. He reached it just as it began to tilt downward. He grabbed the door handle and pulled, but it wouldn't open. Inside, he could see a woman slumped over the steering wheel. She wasn't moving. Panic rose in his chest. He tried the handle again. Nothing. He pounded on the window, hoping to break it, but his hands were weak against the thick glass. The water was rising. He took a deep breath, dived under, and searched for anything to help. He felt around the road beneath the water and grabbed a large rock. Coming back up, He slammed the rock against the window. Once, twice. On the third hit, the glass cracked. Water rushed inside. He reached in, cutting his arm on the broken glass, and struggled to pull the woman out. She was heavier than he expected, and the sinking car pulled them both down. His lungs burned. His arms shook. For a moment, fear took over. He thought about his daughter. He thought about how she would grow up without him. But then he thought about how someone else's child might be waiting for this woman to come home, with one final effort. He freed her from the seatbelt and pushed upward. They broke the surface just as his strength began to fail. He gasped her air and wrapped his arms around her, kicking toward the shore. Every movement felt slow and painful. The rain kept falling, mixing with the river water. By the time he reached land, his body was shaking. He dragged the woman onto the muddy ground and collapsed beside her. She wasn't breathing. His hands trembled as he pressed on her chest, doing what he remembered from a safety video long ago. He counted under his breath, praying it was enough. After a few moments that felt like forever, she coughed and gasped for air. He fell back, exhausted, tears mixing with rain on his face. Sirens sounded in the distance. Someone must have called for help. He stayed long enough to see emergency lights flash across the bridge. As paramedics rushed toward them, he slowly stood up. His clothes were soaked. His arms were bleeding. His body hurt everywhere. One of the responders asked his name. He shook his head and stepped back. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't wait for questions. He walked away into the rain, back toward his old car, thinking only of getting home to his daughter. Behind him, the woman was lifted onto a stretcher, alive. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know that this moment would change his life forever. All he knew was that he had done what he would hope someone else would do. And that night, as rain continued to fall over the bridge, 2 lives had already crossed paths, though neither fully understood it yet. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The streets were wet and quiet, and the city lights reflected off the puddles like tiny stars. Inside the hospital, nurses and doctors moved quickly, taking the woman from the stretcher and rushing her to the emergency room. She was pale, her clothes soaked, but alive. Meanwhile, he stayed outside, shivering, wrapped in his thin jacket. The paramedics had asked him questions, but he didn't answer much. He had given a brief statement, enough to tell them he had pulled her from the water. He had refused any reward, only saying that he had done what anyone would hope someone would do. Once the paramedics went inside, he walked back to his old car. His body ached, and his clothes were torn from the struggle, but he couldn't think about that. All he could think about was getting home. His daughter would be asleep by now, and he hated the thought of her waiting for him in the dark. He drove slowly, the engine groaning under the strain. The city passed by like a blur through the wet windshield. He replayed the moment in his mind, over and over: the crash, the water, the weight of the woman in his arms. Even now, he could feel the cold biting into his skin. He wondered how he had found the strength to keep going when every part of him had wanted to give up out at home. The apartment smelled faintly of last night's dinner, but it was quiet. He checked on his daughter, who was sleeping soundly, her stuffed bear still clutched tightly. He stood there for a moment, letting relief wash over him. She was safe. That was all that mattered. The next morning, he tried to return to his routine as if nothing had happened, but the memory of the night stayed with him. At the warehouse, co-workers asked if he had heard about the accident on the bridge. Some said it had been terrible, that the driver might not survive. He nodded quietly, avoiding eye contact. No one knew he had been the one to save her. Hours later, a call came that would change everything. It wasn't from the hospital. It wasn't from the police. It was from a woman's assistant, asking to speak with him. He thought it was a scam at first. Why would someone like that be calling him? "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Hello. This is calling on behalf of Miss L," the voice said politely. "We would like to thank you personally for saving her life. Would you be available to meet with her?" He froze. Miss L, the name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. I'm not sure. Where would this be?" He asked Dot. She explained it was at her office, a short drive from the city center. She wanted to meet as soon as possible. He hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. He wasn't sure what to do. He had never met someone like her, someone wealthy, someone powerful. He wasn't comfortable in that world. But curiosity and a sense of responsibility nudged him forward. He decided he would go. The office was impressive. Glass walls reflected the sunlight, and the lobby smelled of flowers and polished wood. He felt out of place in his worn jacket and shoes, surrounded by people in suits and uniforms. A secretary led him to a private room. There, sitting behind a large desk, was the woman he had saved. She was awake, her hair damp from her hospital visit, and her eyes held a mixture of fear and gratitude. "You saved my life," she said simply, her voice steady but soft. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what I thought I had to do," he said. She studied him carefully. "You didn't think about yourself at all. You risked everything for me." He looked down at his hands, which still bore faint scars from the glass. "I have a daughter," he said quietly. "I just wanted someone else to have a chance to go home to theirs." Her eyes softened. She leaned back in her chair, considering him. "You're a single father, right?" He nodded. The question surprised him, but he answered honestly. She smiled slightly. "I can see why you acted so quickly. You understand responsibility. You understand what it means to care about someone other than yourself." He didn't know what to say. Compliments were not common in his life. Usually he was judged for what he didn't have, not for what he did. "I want to do something for you," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "But not in a way that would make you uncomfortable. I want to understand your life, the challenges you face, and see how I can help not with money first, but with opportunity." He shook his head. "I can't accept anything," he said. I'm just glad she's alive. That's enough for me." She leaned forward, her gaze gentle but firm. "You risked your life. You deserve more than just gratitude. You deserve a chance to live without constant struggle. You deserve to see your daughter grow up in safety and comfort." He felt a knot in his stomach. He wasn't used to hearing words like that. He had lived his life on the edge of survival for so long that hope seemed fragile, almost dangerous. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice low. "Say you'll let me help," she said. "Let me show you that your courage is not just an act of luck. It's a sign of who you are, and I want to honor that." He looked at her for a long moment, thinking about the long nights, the bills he couldn't pay, the fear he felt every day that something would happen to his daughter while he was at work. Could he really accept help? Could he trust someone like her? Finally, he nodded slightly. "Okay," he said quietly. I'll listen." She smiled, and for the first time, he felt a spark of relief. Not just for himself, but for the life of his daughter. Maybe this meeting could change more than just his circumstances. Maybe it could change the path of their lives entirely. After the meeting, he left the office feeling both nervous and hopeful. The city seemed different now, brighter somehow. Even though he was still the same single father with worn shoes and unpaid bills, something inside him felt lighter. That night, when he returned home, he told his daughter about the day's events in a way that she could understand. "Someone very important, someone you would never expect, is going to help us," he said carefully, making sure not to give too much away. She smiled and hugged him tightly, sensing the excitement in his voice. Over the next few days, he tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the meeting. He wondered what opportunities might come, how his life might change. He felt a strange mix of fear and hope, fear of losing his independence, hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be a little easier. Meanwhile, the woman he saved was recovering in the hospital. Her medical team was amazed at her progress, and she spent hours thinking about the man who had pulled her from the river. She couldn't forget the courage it must have taken to risk his own life for hers, especially when he had so little himself. Her assistants had gathered information, learning about his work, his struggles, and his devotion to his daughter. She wanted to understand everything before making any decision. It wasn't just about gratitude. It was about respect. It was about seeing the kind of person who would do something extraordinary without thinking of reward. She realized that life often puts people in impossible situations, and sometimes ordinary people make extraordinary choices. And in this case, that ordinary man had changed the course of her life, and maybe hers could change his dot as the days passed. He noticed small changes. Calls from her office, invitations to meet, opportunities he had never imagined. And still, he remained cautious, unsure if he deserved any of it. He had always lived in a world where survival was the only goal. Now, he was being offered hope. One evening, as he sat with his daughter after dinner, he thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly it could change in a single moment. One instant, everything seemed normal. The next, life demanded courage, and someone could be depending on you for survival. He hugged his daughter tightly, feeling a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had felt in years. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had a second chance, both for himself and for her. And somewhere across the city, the woman he had saved was thinking the same thing. Two lives, once strangers, now connected by a single act of bravery. Two paths, about to cross again in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The world kept moving outside the windows, busy and unaware. But for him and for her, everything had changed in a moment that neither would ever forget. And the story was far from over. The days after the meeting passed slowly, but his mind never stopped racing. At work, he moved through the motions, lifting boxes, making deliveries, answering calls. But the thoughts of what had happened and what might happen never left him. Every time his phone rang, he wondered if it was her office again. Every time the city lights reflected off wet streets, he thought about that night, the river, and the weight of the woman in his arms. He couldn't sleep properly either. When he finally lay down, exhausted, his mind replayed everything in detail: the crash, the water, the fear, and the moment she gasped for air. The image of her face in relief stayed with him. He had saved her, but he felt he had done nothing extraordinary. Anyone in his place would have tried to do the same. Yet now, the world seemed to want to reward him for what he saw as simply being human. Meanwhile, across town, the woman was recovering in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses who monitored her carefully. She had time to think, and think she did. Every day, she remembered the man who had pulled her from the river. She wanted to meet him again, to understand him, to know the life he lived, and why he had acted without hesitation. To her, he was not just a hero, he was a mystery. How could someone with so little risk everything for a stranger? Her assistants worked quietly, finding out more about him. They discovered that he worked long hours, struggled to pay rent, and raised his daughter alone. They noted his humble living conditions and the strength it must take to balance work and parenting. It only reinforced her admiration. She wanted to see him not just as the man who saved her, but as the man who lived a life of quiet courage every day. One afternoon, she asked for him to be invited to her office again. This time, it was different. There was no emergency, no dramatic rescue. It was simply an invitation to talk. When he arrived, he felt nervous. He had never been in such a place, surrounded by polished floors, glass walls, and people who seemed to float through life with confidence he had never known. She stood to greet him, smiling warmly. "I'm glad you came," she said. He nodded, unsure how to respond. "I just came to see what you wanted," he said, his voice hesitant. "I want to understand you," she said. "Not as the man who saved me, but as a father, as a worker, as someone who keeps going when life is difficult. I want to know what drives you, what you care about." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Talking about himself was not easy. He had spent most of his life solving problems, helping others, and keeping quiet about his struggles. He wasn't used to being the focus of attention. But there was something in her eyes, something genuine, that made him open up. He spoke about his daughter first. How she was his world, how her laughter kept him going, how he worried constantly about her future. He spoke about the small apartment they lived in, about the broken heater, the unpaid bills, the long hours at work. He spoke about hope, the faint hope that maybe, one day, life would be easier. She listened quietly, taking in every word. She asked questions, not to judge, but to understand. She asked about the jobs he did, how he managed fatigue, how he kept himself motivated when things felt impossible. Each question was gentle, thoughtful, and sincere. For the first time in years, he felt someone was truly listening. Someone cared not about what he didn't have, but about who he was. He spoke for hours, sharing details he rarely told anyone. The conversation was not easy, but it felt real. By the time they finished, the room was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the city outside. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "You are stronger than most people I know," she said finally. "Not because you fight floods or lift boxes, but because you fight life every day and never give up. That is courage." He looked down, embarrassed. Praise was not something he was used to. "I'm not special," he said. "I just do what I have to do." "Being ordinary does not make your actions ordinary," she said softly. "What you did that night was extraordinary because it came from who you are. And who you are is someone I want to help." He was silent. The words hung in the air. Part of him wanted to run away, to avoid the attention and the expectation. Another part of him felt a small flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe life could change. Maybe he didn't have to fight every battle alone anymore. After that meeting, things began to move more quickly. She offered small gestures at first, covering an overdue bill, arranging for his daughter to get supplies for school, helping with minor repairs at the apartment. Each act felt surprising, almost unreal, but it helped. For the first time, he realized he didn't have to survive alone. Someone else believed in him. Still, he remained cautious. He had learned through years of struggle that not everyone had good intentions. He wondered if she wanted something in return, or if her kindness would come with strings attached. But each encounter reassured him. She was sincere, genuinely interested in helping, and not in creating debt or dependence. During this time, he also began to notice changes in himself. He walked taller, smiled more often, and allowed himself small moments of joy without guilt. He spent more time with his daughter, teaching her lessons about life, courage, and kindness. He talked to her about the river, carefully omitting the scary details, emphasizing instead the importance of helping others. She listened wide-eyed, proud of her father, unaware that he had risked his life just for her and a stranger. Across town, she continued to observe him quietly. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, and the warmth with which he spoke to his daughter. She admired not only his bravery, but his character, the way he faced life with dignity, despite the hardships. Each meeting, each conversation, made her more determined to support him. One afternoon, she invited him to her home, not the office, not the hospital, but her personal home. It was a gesture that startled him. He had never been inside a house like hers, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and ease. He felt out of place, but was curious. When he arrived, she greeted him warmly, offering tea and snacks. They sat by a large window overlooking a garden, the sunlight streaming in. She asked him about his childhood, his dreams, and the moments in his life that had shaped him. For hours, they talked, laughed, and sometimes fell silent, simply sharing space. During the conversation, she asked the question he had been avoiding. "Why did you save me that night?" He paused, looking down at his hands. I don't know," he said finally. "Someone had to do it. It was just the right thing to do. I didn't think about myself. I just thought about someone who needed help." She nodded, understanding the depth of his answer. "That's rare," she said softly. "Most people think of themselves first. You didn't. You didn't hesitate." He shrugged again, uncomfortable with praise. "I just hoped someone would do the same for my daughter." The words made her pause. She realized that the man who had saved her had done so because he lived with love and responsibility every day. He didn't see heroism in his actions. To him, life was about duty, care, and protecting those he loved. That was a form of courage that could not be bought or taught. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became more regular. She started involving him in decisions about how she could support him. They discussed jobs that could provide stability, educational opportunities for his daughter, and ways to improve their living situation. Each suggestion was made with respect, never imposing, always asking for his thoughts. He began to feel a sense of partnership he had never known before. He was no longer alone in the struggle. He was learning to trust, slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. And in that trust, he found strength, not just for himself, but for the life of his daughter. Through it all, one thing remained clear. Their lives were now connected in a way that neither could ignore. He had saved her life in a single moment of bravery, but she was now saving him and his daughter in ways that would last far longer. It was a bond built on respect, gratitude, and shared humanity. And though neither of them could yet see the full path ahead, one thing was certain. The river that had almost taken her life had also brought their lives together, creating an opportunity neither had expected, but both were beginning to embrace. The world outside continued as usual, unaware of the quiet, powerful connection forming between them. But in the lives of the man and the woman, change was already taking root, slow, steady, and life-altering in ways neither of them could have imagined when the rain first fell that fateful night. Weeks passed since their first meeting, and life began to shift in subtle ways. He noticed small changes in his daily routine, like not feeling the constant weight of worry pressing on his chest. His daughter smiled more, talking about school projects and friends with a lightness that had been missing before. He felt calmer, more grounded, though he didn't fully understand why. It was one afternoon when she invited him to meet again, this time with a different purpose. She had asked him to come to her office, but the atmosphere felt different. He sensed a seriousness beneath her usual calmness. When he arrived, she greeted him with a soft smile and motioned for him to sit. "I've been thinking a lot about you," she began, her voice steady but kind. "About the life you live, the sacrifices you make, and the courage you show every day. I want to do more than just thank you. I want to help you in a way that really matters." He shifted in his seat, uncertain. He had already been touched by her gestures and support, but he felt uneasy about receiving more. Accepting help felt strange. It was not just about pride. It was about the life he had built with his own hands, I don't know what you mean, he said cautiously. She leaned forward. I mean, I want to help you build a life that isn't filled with constant struggle. Not with charity that disappears after a moment, but with opportunities that last, that create stability for you and your daughter. He frowned slightly. I don't want anyone to think I'm just looking for handouts, he said. You're not, she replied firmly. You've earned every bit of what you have, every sacrifice, every long hour, every hardship. I'm not here to take that away from you. I'm here to add to it. He looked at her, unsure how to respond. He had spent his life navigating challenges alone, and the idea that someone wanted to truly help him without strings attached felt almost impossible. Yet there was sincerity in her eyes, a quiet promise that this was real. She began to outline her plan. It wasn't just money. She offered a stable job opportunity, one that would respect his experience and allow him to use his skills. She spoke about education for his daughter's scholarships, tutoring, resources she could provide so she wouldn't have to struggle as he had. She even mentioned housing, helping to repair and improve their apartment so it would be safe and comfortable. He listened, stunned. It was overwhelming to hear someone care so much, to offer help that went beyond words or temporary gestures. For years, he had worried about bills, food, rent, and school supplies, living in constant tension. Now, someone was offering a hand to steady the path ahead. But why? He asked finally. Why would you do all this? You don't even know me. You don't have to help. She smiled gently. Because what you did for me that night showed me what true character looks like. Most people think about themselves first. Most people hesitate, but you didn't. You risked everything for a stranger. That courage, that selflessness, it matters. It proves the kind of person you are, and I want to honor that. He felt a lump in his throat. Words didn't come easily, and he wasn't used to expressing emotion in front of anyone. He swallowed hard. I just wanted someone to live, he said softly. I didn't do it for thanks or reward. I know, she said, and that's why I want to help you now. Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. He took a deep breath, trying to process everything. He thought about his daughter, about the nights he had spent worrying if she would have enough to eat, enough warmth, enough care. He thought about the long hours, the aches in his back, the fear that came with living paycheck to paycheck. The offer before him was more than opportunity. It was freedom from constant anxiety. Still, he hesitated. I don't want to feel like I owe anyone, he said. You won't, she assured him. This isn't about debt. This is about connection, about trust, about recognizing courage and building on it. I want you to have the stability you've worked so hard for. That's all. For a long moment, he sat quietly, considering her words. The room was still, filled with soft light and the faint hum of the city outside. He thought about his daughter's future and how much he wanted her to grow up with opportunities he never had. He thought about his own life and the chance to breathe without constant fear. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I'll accept. Her smile widened, gentle and reassuring. Good. Then let's make a plan together, step by step. You won't be alone in this. I'll be here to help you figure it out, every step of the way. Over the next days and weeks, things began to shift dramatically. The job she arranged for him was something he could manage, something that respected his skills without overextending him. The apartment received small improvements, heating repairs, fresh paint, safer fixtures, making the space warmer and more welcoming for his daughter. Tutors were arranged to help her with schoolwork, and she began to thrive in ways he had only hoped for. It wasn't easy at first. He was used to struggle and worry, and letting someone else take responsibility in even a small way felt unnatural. But slowly, he learned to accept it, to trust that this was genuine. The woman never pressured him or tried to control him. She offered guidance and opportunity, letting him make the choices that mattered. Through it all, he noticed small changes in himself as well. He walked taller, smiled more often, and allowed himself moments of joy without guilt. He spent evenings reading with his daughter, helping her with homework, and telling her stories he had never had time to share. He felt lighter, freer, more capable of being the father he had always wanted to be. She also began involving him in small decisions about her work, asking his perspective on projects, valuing his opinion. It was strange at first, but he realized that she respected him not only for the act of courage, but for his intelligence, his judgment, and the insight he had gained from life experience. That respect meant more than any gesture of money or support. One afternoon, as they walked through a nearby park, she asked him a question he hadn't expected. "Do you feel different?" She said softly, "Since we started working together, since I offered help. Do you feel a change?" He paused, looking at the sunlight filtering through the trees. He thought about the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the constant pressure that had once defined his life. He thought about his daughter, laughing at school, growing stronger, happier, and more confident. He thought about himself, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. "Yes," he admitted finally, "I feel like I can breathe. Like I don't have to carry everything alone anymore." She nodded, smiling. "Good. That's exactly what I hoped. Life isn't meant to be carried alone. Courage is not just about facing danger. It's about being willing to accept help when it matters." He looked at her, understanding the truth in her words. The offer she had made was not just about stability. It was about trust, about connection, about believing that life could be better. And in accepting it, he had found a strength he hadn't realized was missing. The days that followed were filled with practical changes. His work schedule became manageable, allowing him to spend more time with his daughter. Bills that had once piled up were paid on time, easing the constant tension in his chest. His apartment began to feel like a home rather than just a place to sleep. And his daughter thrived, excelling in school and forming friendships that brought her joy. Through it all, the woman remained a quiet presence in his life, not controlling, not intrusive, but supportive in ways that mattered. She checked in, offered advice when asked, and encouraged him to pursue opportunities he had never thought possible. One evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "Everything's changing, isn't it?" He smiled, holding her close. "Yes," he said softly, "and it's only the beginning." Across town, she reflected on the impact of one single act, the night he had risked his life to save hers. She realized that her own life had been changed as well, not just by being rescued, but by the courage, humility, and integrity she had witnessed. It reminded her of what truly mattered, beyond wealth, beyond power, beyond success. And as their lives continued to intersect, a new chapter had begun, not defined by fear, struggle, or danger, but by trust, opportunity, and the quiet power of one human act creating a ripple that could never be undone. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but for the first time in a long time, he could see possibilities. And he knew that whatever came next, he and his daughter would face it with courage, guided by the knowledge that people could care. People could act selflessly, and sometimes life could surprise you in the most remarkable ways. Life had begun to settle into a rhythm that felt almost dreamlike. The single father still worked hard, but now the weight he had carried for years seemed lighter. His daughter's laughter filled the apartment, echoing off freshly painted walls and furniture that had once been worn and patched. Simple things like sitting together for dinner without worrying about bills or late notices felt extraordinary. The woman he had saved continued to play a quiet role in their lives. She wasn't intrusive. She didn't make demands. She simply offered support when needed and encouragement whenever possible. She knew he wanted independence, and she respected that. But the small acts of kindness, helping with school supplies, arranging tutoring, improving the apartment, connecting him with stable work, had transformed the foundation of his life. One evening, after a long day at work, he walked through the park with his daughter. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over everything. She chattered happily about her day at school, about a new friend she had made, about a book she had been reading. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace. Life still had challenges, but the fear that had once haunted every day had eased. Later, as they prepared for bed, she asked quietly, "Do you think she'll ever come by again?" Referring to the woman who had helped them so much. He smiled. "I think she will," he said, "and I hope she knows how much she's changed our lives." In the following weeks, he did meet her again, this time in a more relaxed setting. They sat at a small cafe, away from the office and the pressures of the world. For the first time, they spoke not about plans or opportunities, but about life itself. She asked about his childhood, his dreams, the small joys he had once allowed himself to enjoy. He spoke cautiously at first, but gradually words flowed easier. He realized he had been carrying more than just physical burdens. He had carried emotional walls for years, walls that she had begun to help him lower. "I've learned a lot from you," she said softly. Not just about courage, but about humility, about patience, about doing the right thing without expecting anything in return. "It's rare, and it's inspiring." He laughed lightly, a sound that felt strange to him. "I don't know about inspiring. I just live my life the best I can. I do what I have to do." "That's exactly why it's inspiring," she replied. "Because most people wouldn't do it. Most people would think of themselves first. You didn't, and that choice has changed everything, not just my life, but yours and your daughter's too." He looked down at his hands, remembering the night she had nearly drowned, the struggle in the water, the fear and the relief. That single act had connected their lives in ways he could never have imagined. And now, months later, he realized that the ripple of that moment had grown larger than he had ever expected. In the weeks that followed, he found himself thinking about the future differently. He had started saving a little money, something he had rarely been able to do before. He enrolled his daughter in extracurricular activities. She had always wanted to try painting, music, sports. He even allowed himself to dream about small vacations, simple trips where the two of them could just enjoy time together. At work, things had stabilized. The opportunities she had provided gave him room to breathe, to focus on tasks without the constant fear of being overwhelmed. He still worked hard, but now he felt capable of more than just surviving. He could think about growth, about learning new skills, about building a life beyond struggle. One afternoon, as he walked home, he saw her standing outside his building, waiting. She waved, and he smiled. It wasn't a formal meeting this time, it was just a visit. She had brought something small for his daughter, a thoughtful gift that made her eyes light up. Watching his daughter's joy, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking at her. "Not just for this, but for everything. You've changed our lives." She shook her head. "You changed your own life," she said. "I just helped. You made the choice to keep going, to accept help, and to believe in something better. That's what matters." It struck him that she was right. He had always believed that his life was limited by circumstance, that he had to do everything alone. But now, He realized that accepting help didn't make him weak, it made him stronger. It allowed him to care for his daughter in ways he never could have imagined. Over time, their connection deepened. Not romantically, not necessarily personally, but in a way that was profound. She became a mentor, a guide, and a witness to his journey. And he, in turn, became someone she admired, not just for the act that had saved her life, but for the integrity, determination, and love he showed every day. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of her office, she said, "You've come a long way. Not just in material terms, but in confidence, in hope, in the way you see your life. I'm proud of you." He looked at her, eyes wide. Compliments were not something he was used to, and they made him feel vulnerable. Thank you," he said softly. "But it's really just life getting a little easier. That's all?" "No," she insisted gently. "It's more than that. It's courage, perseverance, and the willingness to accept change. You've done this. I just helped guide it." He felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. Recognition, not pity. Respect, not judgment. And most of all, hope that he could create a stable, joyful life for his daughter. In the months that followed, he continued to grow. His daughter flourished, making friends, excelling in school, and sharing her excitement with him every day. They took small trips together, went to the park, and explored new experiences. He watched her confidence grow, knowing he was providing the foundation she needed. He also began to see changes in himself. He smiled more easily, laughed more often, and allowed himself small joys he had once denied. He discovered hobbies he had forgotten, like reading, walking in the park, and even cooking new meals for his daughter. The weight of constant survival had lifted, replaced by the possibility of living fully. The woman remained a steady presence. She continued to guide and encourage, checking in on them and offering help where needed. Her actions never demanded repayment or loyalty. They were simply extensions of her belief in his courage and character. One day, as they walked together in the city, he turned to her and said, "You know, I never thought life could feel like this. I never thought I could feel safe, happy, or free." She smiled. "It's not about luck. It's about courage, trust, and connection. You've had all of those. You just needed a chance to see them in action." He nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. That night on the river, when he had acted without thought for his own safety, had changed everything. It had created a bridge between two lives that neither of them could have anticipated. Years later, he would look back on that night, not with fear, but with appreciation. It was the night that led to stability, opportunity, and growth for him and his daughter. It was the night that introduced someone into their lives who believed in them, guided them, and reminded them that courage and kindness could change everything. He knew life would still have challenges, as it always does. But now, he faced them with tools he had never had before: support, hope, and the knowledge that he did not have to walk alone. He had learned to accept help without guilt, to trust without fear, and to believe in a future brighter than the past. His daughter, once surrounded by worry and uncertainty, now thrived in an environment filled with love, stability, and opportunity. She grew confident, kind, and compassionate, knowing that her father's courage had shaped the life they shared. And the woman, whose life had been nearly taken that night, found something unexpected too. She realized that her gratitude had led to meaningful connection, that one act of courage had reminded her of the value of human kindness, humility, and perseverance. Their lives, once strangers, were now intertwined in ways that made both richer, stronger, and more fulfilled. The rain on the night of the accident had once seemed like a moment of fear and despair. But in the end, it became the turning point, a single act of bravery that rippled outward, transforming lives, creating trust, and proving that human courage and kindness could overcome the heaviest obstacles. The man had saved a life that night, but in return, he and his daughter received something just as valuable: hope, stability, and a future where they could thrive. And the woman, forever grateful, learned that heroism isn't always about wealth or power. It's about integrity, selflessness, and the quiet strength found in ordinary people who do extraordinary things. Together, they had discovered something far greater than survival. They had discovered that life could change in a single moment, that trust and kindness could reshape destinies, and that courage, both seen and unseen, was the force that made it all possible. And in that realization, they found peace, joy, and a future full of possibility.